Wyoming Territory, 1882. Colt Patterson stared into the approaching wall of white that threatened to swallow his ranch whole. The bitter November wind howled across the open range, carrying the first icy fingers of the blizzard that had been brewing all week. At 26, he'd weathered his share of Wyoming winters, but something about this storm felt different, meaner, more vengeful. "Gonna be a bad one," he muttered to no one but his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chief. Colt tugged his sheepskin collar higher against his neck and squinted at the distant line of cottonwoods that marked the boundaries of the Rocking Pea, the modest cattle ranch he'd carved out of this unforgiving territory over 4 hard years. A man could lose himself out here. Many had, some by choice, others by circumstance. For Colt, it had been a little of both. The frontier was no place for putting down roots that went deeper than what was necessary for survival. That's what his father had taught him before a rustler's bullet left 11-year-old Colt an orphan. The lesson had only hardened during his years as a drover, watching men waste away from loneliness or get themselves killed trying to defend loves that the frontier inevitably took anyway. Better to keep moving, keep working, keep your heart as empty as the vast Wyoming sky. A lone wolf howled somewhere in the distance, the sound carrying across the windswept plain. Colt felt a kinship with that solitary creature. Wolves mate for life, but this one called with no answer. Some things were meant to be endured alone. "Come on, Chief," Colt said, wheeling his horse toward home. "Time to batten down for the storm." As he rode, the first fat snowflakes began to fall, dancing and swirling before landing on his shoulders. Chief's hooves crunched through the thin crust of earlier snowfall. Winter had come early this year, and if this blizzard was as fierce as it promised to be, it would be a long one. The small, sturdy log cabin appeared through the increasing snowfall, smoke curling from the stone chimney. It wasn't much, a main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to for his tack and tools, but it was his. No debts, no partners, no complications. Just as he dismounted and led Chief toward the stable, a sound caught his attention, faint but unmistakable above the moaning wind. Colt froze, straining his ears. There it came again. The distant jingle of harness bells. Who in their right mind, he started, then swore under his breath. Only a fool or someone desperate would be out in this weather. Either way, they wouldn't last the night without shelter. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind was picking up, driving the snow horizontally now. Colt hurriedly stabled Chief, tossed him some hay, and grabbed his Winchester from its scabbard. The sound had come from the east, toward the main trail that connected the scattered ranches to the nearest town of Whitetail Creek, some 20 miles distant. He trudged through the deepening snow, the rifle at the ready. In these parts, caution kept men alive. The jingling grew louder, accompanied now by the creak of wagon wheels and a woman's voice, high and frightened, urging horses forward. Through the white haze, a shape materialized, a small wagon pulled by 2 exhausted horses, their heads lowered against the wind, their flanks crusted with ice. The driver, bundled in what appeared to be every piece of clothing she owned, was barely visible beneath a snow-covered hat and scarf. "Hello, the wagon," Colt called out, lowering his rifle slightly. "You're headed nowhere but trouble in this storm." The driver pulled back on the reins, and the wagon creaked to a stop. A face appeared as the scarf was lowered, a woman's face, young and frightened, her cheeks reddened by cold, her blue eyes wide with fear and relief. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was going to die out here." Colt approached cautiously, noting the wagon's eastern manufacture and the fine quality of the horses, despite their current bedraggled state. This was no local ranch woman. "You're a good 5 miles off the main trail," he said. "Where were you headed?" "Whitetail Creek," she replied, her teeth chattering. "My uncle has a store there. I was supposed to arrive yesterday, but the wagon broke an axle and I had to wait for repairs in Laramie." She looked around helplessly. "I thought I could make it before the storm hit." Colt sighed. Frontier wisdom dictated you didn't turn away travelers in need, even if they were strangers, even if they disrupted the solitude he prized. Especially not when they were young women who would freeze to death otherwise. "My ranch is just yonder," he said, gesturing toward his cabin. "You can wait out the storm there. No traveling until it passes, which might be days." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, I'm Katherine Summers," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Most people call me Kate." "Colt Patterson," he replied, taking her hand briefly. "Let's get those horses taken care of before they founder." The wind howled louder as they led the wagon to his small stable. The storm was settling in for the duration, the snow now so thick that the cabin, not 50 yards away, was barely visible. "We need to hurry," Colt said, unhitching her horses with practiced efficiency. Storm's getting worse. Catherine Kate nodded, helping as best she could with cold-numbed fingers. She was no helpless city girl, he noted. She knew how to handle horses and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, even if her accent placed her from back east somewhere. Once the horses were rubbed down, blanketed and fed, they made a dash for the cabin, the wind driving snow against them like tiny needles. Colt pushed open the heavy door, and they stumbled inside, gasping with relief at the welcoming warmth from the fire he'd built earlier. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, somewhat awkwardly. It had been a long time since a woman had stood in his cabin, maybe never in this one. He hung his coat and hat on pegs by the door and added a log to the fire. Kate unwrapped her layers, revealing a travel-worn but well-made blue dress that matched her eyes. Her hair, coming loose from its pins, was a deep chestnut brown, falling in waves past her shoulders. She couldn't be more than 22, Colt guessed, and despite her current disheveled state, she was strikingly beautiful. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Patterson," she said, holding her hands toward the fire. "I truly thought I might die out there." "Colt's fine," he replied, "and anyone would have done the same." She smiled, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the small cabin. Not anyone. There are plenty of hard men in this territory who wouldn't bother with a stranger. Colt busied himself with coffee to avoid looking at her smile again. "You said your uncle has a store in Whitetail." "Yes, Thomas Whitman's general store. I've come to help him run it," she hesitated, "and to make a fresh start." He nodded, not asking for more. Everyone out here was running toward something or away from something, sometimes both. It wasn't his business. "Coffee," he offered. "Then I'll see what I can rustle up for supper." "I have provisions in my wagon," she said quickly. "I wouldn't want to impose on your supplies." "We'll worry about that tomorrow. Storm's too fierce now. I've got beans and bacon, some biscuits from yesterday." As Colt prepared the simple meal, he was acutely aware of Kate moving about his cabin, examining his few possessions. The small bookshelf with its dozen well-worn volumes, the guitar leaning in the corner, the crude landscape sketches pinned to one wall. "You play?" she asked, gesturing toward the guitar. "Some," he replied, uncomfortable with her interest. "Helps pass the long winter nights." "And you draw too," she continued, studying the sketches. "You have a good eye for the land." "Just scribbles," he said dismissively. "Nothing important." Kate turned to face him fully, her expression thoughtful. "I disagree. They show how you see this place, with respect and understanding. Not everyone sees the beauty in this harsh country." Colt felt a strange discomfort at her assessment. Most people saw him as just another hard-bitten cowboy, not someone who noticed beauty or tried to capture it. He didn't know how to respond, so he changed the subject. "How'd you end up heading to Wyoming Territory?" "Most folks are trying to leave, not arrive." Kate's smile dimmed slightly. "My parents died last year, influenza. Uncle Thomas is my only remaining family, and Philadelphia held too many painful memories." She straightened her shoulders. "I thought a change of scenery might be just what I needed." "You picked quite the scenery," Colt said dryly, nodding toward the window where snow was now piling against the glass. "Wyoming winters can break even those born to them." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Patterson," she replied with unexpected steel in her voice, "and I don't break easily." Their eyes met across the small room, and Colt felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years, respect tinged with interest. He quickly looked away. Getting interested in a woman like Katherine Summers was foolishness of the highest order. She was educated, refined, clearly from money. She might be playing at frontier life now, but women like her didn't stay. The territory would drive her back east within a year, and even if it didn't, Colt Patterson wasn't the kind of man who let himself need anyone. He'd learned that lesson too well and paid for it in blood. As the evening progressed and the storm raged outside, they ate their simple meal in a silence that gradually became more comfortable. Kate asked about the ranch, how many cattle he ran, how long he'd been established, whether he hired hands during calving season. Her questions were practical, showing a genuine interest in understanding ranch life. "Just me most of the year," Colt explained. "Bring on 2 hands during spring calving and fall roundup. Run about 300 head, not the biggest spread, but it's paid for." "That's quite an accomplishment for someone so young," Kate observed. "Most ranches take generations to establish." Colt shrugged. "Started cowboying when I was 12, saved every penny, learned which land to buy and which to avoid, got lucky with some good years." "That's not luck," Kate countered. "That's determination and intelligence." Before he could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows and the cabin creaked ominously. The blizzard was intensifying. "Best get some sleep," Colt said, rising from the table. "You can take the bedroom, I'll bunk out here by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and will," he interrupted firmly. "I sleep out here half the time anyway." In truth, that was a lie, but Colt wasn't about to let a woman, especially one as fine as Katherine Summers, sleep on his floor while he took the bed. His father might not have been able to teach him much before dying, but he'd been clear about how to treat a lady. Kate finally nodded her acceptance. "Thank you for everything." As Colt spread his bedroll near the hearth, listening to the soft sounds of Kate preparing for bed in his small bedroom, he reflected on how quickly life could change. This morning, he'd been alone as he preferred. Tonight, his quiet sanctuary had been breached by a woman whose very presence seemed to fill all the empty spaces he'd carefully maintained. Just until the storm passes, he reminded himself. Then she'd be gone to her uncle's store in town, and he could return to the solitude that kept him safe, from memories, from hopes, from the dangerous possibility of loss that came with caring. The blizzard had other ideas. For 3 days the storm raged without abating. 3 days of howling wind and snow piling higher than the windowsills. 3 days of Colt and Kate confined to the small cabin, learning the rhythms of sharing a space never meant for two. To Colt's surprise, Katherine proved herself useful and undemanding. She cooked while he tended the animals, twice daily expeditions that left him exhausted from battling through shoulder-deep snowdrifts. She mended his shirts without being asked, finding his small repair kit and working quietly by the fire in the evenings. She didn't chatter needlessly but conversed thoughtfully when spoken to. On the second evening, as the wind moaned like a dying thing around the cabin corners, Kate nodded toward the guitar. "Would you play something?" she asked. "It might help drown out that dreadful noise." Colt hesitated, then shrugged. "Don't know many proper songs," he warned, but reached for the instrument anyway. As his fingers found the strings, the familiar comfort of music settled over him. He played an old cattle-driving song, then a Mexican melody he'd learned from a vaquero years ago. Kate listened, her face soft in the firelight, occasionally humming along when she recognized a tune. When he paused, she asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" "Here and there," he replied, "cowboy camps mostly. One old trail boss was from New Orleans. He could make a guitar talk. Taught me some when I was just a kid." "You play beautifully," she said simply. "Now I know you're just being polite," Colt replied with a rare smile. "But thank you all the same." Kate leaned forward, the firelight catching red highlights in her chestnut hair. "May I ask you something personal, Colt?" He tensed but nodded. "Why are you out here all alone? You're young, capable, clearly intelligent. Most men your age are either working for others, saving up, or have families started." Colt's fingers stilled on the strings. "The frontier's no place for family men," he said flatly. "Seen too many widows and orphans, too many good men in early graves trying to protect what can't be protected out here." "Yet people do it," Kate pressed gently. "There are families thriving all across the territory." "And others barely surviving," he countered. "My father was a good man with a small spread not unlike this one, didn't stop rustlers from killing him when I was 11. My mother had already died birthing my sister, who didn't survive either. The frontier takes, Miss Summers, that's what it does." Kate was quiet for a long moment. "I'm very sorry about your family," she finally said, "but with respect, Mr. Patterson, the world takes, not just the frontier. My parents died in Philadelphia, surrounded by doctors and modern convenience. Death and loss find us wherever we are." Colt put the guitar aside, suddenly restless. "Maybe so. But out here it's a special kind of brutal, makes more sense to face it alone." "Does it?" Her blue eyes were thoughtful. "Seems to me that might be the worst way to face hardship." "Speaking from experience, are you?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. "Yes," she answered simply. "I buried both my parents alone. I had friends, certainly society acquaintances, distant relations offering condolences. But in grief, I was utterly alone and it nearly destroyed me." She gazed into the fire. "I think that's why I came west, not just for my uncle, but because I couldn't bear the isolation of being surrounded by people who didn't truly see me." Her honesty disarmed him. Colt found himself wanting to offer something genuine in return, though the words came slowly, rusty from disuse. "After my father died, I worked ranch to ranch, cattle drive to cattle drive. Never stayed anywhere long, figured that was safest. He paused. But a man gets tired of drifting eventually, wanted something that was mine, something no one could take away. And you've built that, Kate said, gesturing to the cabin around them. It's a fine achievement. It's just a start, Colt admitted. Got plans to expand come spring, build a proper house eventually. He stopped, realizing how that sounded. Not that I need much, just me here. Kate smiled. We all need dreams larger than our current circumstances, Mr. Patterson. That's what keeps us moving forward. The third day of the storm brought a lull by afternoon. The snow continued to fall, but the wind calmed enough that Colt could clear paths to the stable and woodpile. Kate insisted on helping, and together they dug out the most essential areas around the cabin. Will your cattle survive this? She asked, leaning on her shovel and looking toward the distant pastures, now completely blanketed in white. Most will, Colt replied. They've got the South Ridge for shelter, and I left them plenty of grazing area. Wyoming cattle are tough, they'll dig through the snow for forage. Like Wyoming men, Kate said with a small smile. Determined to survive against the odds. Colt found himself returning her smile, some might say foolishly stubborn. There's a fine line between stubbornness and perseverance, Kate observed, resuming her shoveling. The difference often lies in whether the goal is worthy. As they worked side by side in the crisp, cold air, Colt kept finding his gaze drawn to Kate. Her cheeks were flushed with exertion, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Despite the harsh conditions, she showed no complaint, matching his pace with determination. There was something appealing about a woman who didn't shy away from hard work. That evening, after a supper of venison stew made from Colt's stored provisions, they sat by the fire drinking coffee. The storm had picked up again, but the howling seemed less threatening now, almost familiar. Tell me about your uncle's store, Colt said. What kind of operation does he run? Kate's expression brightened. It's a wonderful old place, been there since Whitetail Creek was just a few cabins. Uncle Thomas sells everything from nails to fancy ribbons. He's getting older now, his hands too arthritic for the fine work of accounting and inventory. That's where I'll be most useful. You have experience with shopkeeping. My father owned a manufacturing business. I helped with his books since I was 16. A shadow crossed her face. After he died, I discovered he'd been keeping certain financial difficulties from me. If I'd known sooner, perhaps I could have helped. Now, all that's left is what little he didn't lose in bad investments. So you're coming west out of necessity as well as choice, Colt observed. Kate lifted her chin. I'm coming west for a new beginning on my own terms. The necessity simply hastened my decision. Colt nodded, respecting her refusal to be seen as destitute or desperate. Whitetail Creek could use someone with business sense. Towns growing, railroads talking about putting in a spur line next year. That would change everything, Kate said, for the town and the surrounding ranches. For better or worse, Colt agreed. Bring better prices for cattle, but also more people, more complications. You don't sound entirely pleased by the prospect. Colt shrugged. Like most things, it has its good and bad. I came out here for the space, the freedom. More people means less of both. Yet you helped me without hesitation, Kate pointed out, a complete stranger disturbing your solitude. That's different, Colt said. Out here we help travelers in need, it's the code. Doesn't mean I want a town springing up on my doorstep. Kate studied him thoughtfully. You're an interesting contradiction, Mr. Patterson. You value your isolation, yet you follow a code that connects you to others. You claim to prefer solitude, yet you play music that's meant to be shared. Her insight made him uncomfortable. People are more complicated than they first appear, he said finally, even frontier cowboys. Especially frontier cowboys, I'm beginning to think, Kate replied with a soft smile. The next morning, Colt awoke to silence. The constant background roar of the blizzard had ceased, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. He rose quickly, added wood to the banked fire, and moved to the window. The world outside was transformed. Snow lay in massive drifts, some nearly reaching the cabin's roof. The morning sun reflected blindingly off the pristine white landscape, unbroken except for the paths they'd cleared yesterday, now half filled again. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue that seemed close enough to touch. Is it over? Kate asked from the bedroom doorway, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The worst of it, Colt confirmed, but we're not going anywhere soon. Snow's too deep for wagons, maybe even for horses in some drifts. Kate joined him at the window, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her hair. It's beautiful, she breathed. Like a new world. Beautiful and deadly, Colt cautioned. We've got enough provisions for another week, maybe two if we stretch them. By then, some trails should be passable. A week, Kate repeated, and Colt couldn't tell if she was dismayed or pleased by the prospect. My uncle will be worried. No one expects travel in weather like this, Colt assured her. He'll know you've found shelter somewhere. After breakfast, Colt spent the morning checking his cattle. The herd had weathered the storm well, huddled together in the lee of the ridge as he'd predicted. Only 2 yearlings hadn't survived, better than he'd feared. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, he found Kate had reorganized his small kitchen area, sorting and inventorying his provisions. Hope you don't mind, she said, looking up from her work. I thought it would be helpful to know exactly what we have. Don't mind at all, he replied, surprised to find he meant it. Her presence in his kitchen, her small improvements, didn't feel like an intrusion as he would have expected. That afternoon, he showed her how to use snowshoes, fashioned from spare materials in his lean-to. Kate was a quick study, and soon they were exploring the transformed landscape around the cabin, the snow squeaking beneath their feet in the bitter cold. It's like walking on clouds, Kate laughed, catching herself after a near stumble. Just don't fall through these clouds, Colt warned. Some of these drifts are deep enough to swallow a person whole. He found himself enjoying her company, her fresh perspective on sights he'd grown accustomed to. Through her eyes, the harshness of winter took on a beauty he'd forgotten to see. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings, Colt tended to the animals and checked the property. Afternoons, they worked together on necessary tasks, clearing more snow, replenishing the woodpile, preserving their food supplies. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking or companionably silent, occasionally with Colt playing his guitar. On their 5th evening together, as Kate darned a sock by firelight, she asked, Have you always wanted to be a rancher? Colt, cleaning his rifle nearby, considered the question. Not always. As a boy, I thought I might be a ranger or a lawman, had notions of bringing justice to the frontier. What changed? Grew up, realized most lawmen die young or grow bitter. And justice out here is a complicated thing. He set the rifle aside. Ranching made more sense. Build something instead of just enforcing rules others made. And the drawing, the music. Where do those fit into your cattle empire? There was gentle teasing in her voice. Colt smiled despite himself. Hardly an empire, and those are just pastimes for winter evenings. Nothing serious. I think they're more than that, Kate said quietly. I think they show who you might have been in a different life, perhaps who you still could be. Now you're just romanticizing a simple cowboy, Colt deflected, uncomfortable with her perception. Not romanticizing, observing, Kate set her darning aside. You're not what you first appear, Colt Patterson. You've built walls to keep the world out, but I don't think you're nearly as solitary in your soul as you pretend to be. Her words struck too close to truths he didn't examine. And you, Katherine Summers, are you what you first appear? Something flickered in her eyes, caution perhaps. What do I appear to be? A refined Eastern lady playing at frontier life. Someone who'll grow tired of the hardship and return to civilization within a year. She flinched slightly and Colt immediately regretted his harshness. Is that truly what you see? She asked, her voice measured. Colt sighed. No. Not anymore. That's what I expected to see when I first found you in that wagon, but you've proven tougher than that. Kate nodded slowly. I came west to reinvent myself, it's true, but not as a temporary adventure. I want to build something lasting here, she hesitated. There's something I haven't told you about my situation. Colt tensed, suddenly wary. Oh. My father's financial failures weren't entirely his fault. He trusted a business partner who betrayed him, embezzled funds, forged documents. By the time it was discovered, the damage was done. She twisted her hands in her lap. This partner was also my fiancé. Colt's eyebrows rose. Your fiancé stole from your father. And from me, from our future. He convinced my father to invest everything in ventures that didn't exist, then disappeared with the money. Her voice hardened. He left me with nothing but debt and a ruined reputation by association. Some in Philadelphia society whispered that I must have known, must have been involved. That's why you really came west, Colt said, understanding dawning. You're running from scandal. Not running, Kate corrected firmly. Starting fresh where I can be judged on my own merits, not on rumor and innuendo, where what matters is what I can do, not who my family was or what happened to them. Colt absorbed this, seeing her in a new light. That takes courage. Or desperation, she said with a small smile. Sometimes they look remarkably similar. Either way, Colt said, Whitetail Creek will be better for having you. Your uncle is fortunate. Thank you for not judging me, Kate said softly. Many would. The frontier has a way of making past troubles seem distant, Colt replied. Out here it's what you do now that counts, not what happened before you arrived. Is that true for you as well, she asked. Have you left troubles behind? Colt was silent for a long moment. Nothing like yours, just ghosts, memories. Things that taught me it's safer to rely on myself. As the night deepened around the small cabin, something shifted between them, a new understanding, a deeper trust. Colt found himself wondering what it might have been like to meet Katherine Summers under different circumstances, in a different life. But such thoughts were dangerous, leading nowhere but disappointment. In a few days, the snow would recede enough for travel. She would go to her uncle in town, and Colt would return to his solitary existence. Anything else was just a temporary aberration, a storm-bound fantasy that couldn't survive in the harsh light of frontier reality. Yet as he spread his bedroll that night, listening to the soft sounds of Kate preparing for sleep in his bedroom, Colt couldn't deny the hollow feeling that had begun to form in his chest at the thought of her departure. 8 days after the blizzard began, the snow had compacted and melted enough that the main trail to town would likely be passable by wagon. Colt announced this at breakfast, watching Kate's face carefully for her reaction. That's wonderful news, she said, though her smile seemed forced. My uncle must be frantic by now. We should be able to head out tomorrow if the weather holds, Colt confirmed. It'll be slow going, but we'll make it to town before nightfall. Kate asked. You don't think I'd let you travel alone after all this, Colt replied. Besides, I need supplies. Might as well make the trip worthwhile. The day was spent preparing, checking the wagon, packing Kate's belongings, ensuring the horses were rested and ready. An unusual tension hung in the air, neither of them mentioning what would happen after they reached town. That evening, their last together in the cabin, Kate asked hesitantly, Will you play something, one last time? Colt nodded, reaching for his guitar. But instead of the usual trail songs or ballads, his fingers found a melody he rarely played, a gentle, melancholy tune his mother had sung when he was very young. Kate listened, her eyes glistening in the firelight. When he finished, the silence between them felt laden with things unsaid. That was beautiful, she whispered. I've never heard it before. My mother's song, Colt explained. One of the few things I remember about her. Thank you for sharing it with me. Colt set the guitar aside, feeling suddenly vulnerable. Kate, when we get to town. A sharp knock at the door cut him off. They both froze, exchanging startled glances. Visitors were rare in the best of weather, unheard of after a blizzard like this. Colt rose, reaching for his gun belt hanging by the door. Stay back, he warned Kate quietly. Who's there? He called, buckling the belt around his waist. Marshal Everett from Whitetail Creek, came the reply. Looking for Miss Katherine Summers. Kate gasped softly. Colt opened the door to reveal a middle-aged man in a heavy coat, a marshal's star pinned to his chest. Evening, Marshal, Colt said cautiously. What brings you out this way? The marshal's weathered face was grim. Miss Summers here, her uncle's been worried sick. I'm here, Kate said, stepping forward. Is my uncle all right? He's fine, miss. It's you we've been concerned about. The marshal's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the cozy domestic scene. When you didn't arrive before the storm, search parties went out, found your wagon tracks turning off the main trail. Been checking every homestead and ranch since the snow let up. Mr. Patterson saved my life, Kate explained quickly. I was lost in the blizzard. He brought me here, gave me shelter. The marshal's expression remained skeptical. That's so, Patterson, just being neighborly, were you? Colt bristled at the implication. That's exactly what I was doing, Marshal. Miss Summers would have frozen to death otherwise. I was planning to escort Miss Summers to town tomorrow, Colt continued. The trail should be passable by then. No need, the marshal replied. I've got a sleigh outside. We can have Miss Summers back with her uncle tonight. Kate looked stricken tonight. But best not keep your uncle waiting any longer, miss, the marshal said firmly. He's been beside himself with worry. Colt recognized the situation for what it was. The marshal was here to rescue Kate, whether she needed rescuing or not. Any protest from either of them would only fuel suspicions about what had transpired during their days alone together. "The marshal's right," Colt said quietly to Kate. "You should go now." She met his eyes and he saw her understanding the impossible position they were in. A young, unmarried woman spending over a week alone with a bachelor rancher. Frontier societies had strict codes about such things, whatever the circumstances. "Of course," she said finally, "let me gather my things." The marshal waited outside while Kate hurriedly collected her belongings. When they were alone for a final moment, she turned to Colt, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This isn't how I wanted to say goodbye," she whispered. "It's not goodbye," Colt said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'll be in town in a few days, we can talk then." Kate nodded, but her expression was doubtful. They both knew that once she returned to town, once the gossip started, once she was back under her uncle's roof and the protection of proper society, everything would be different. "Thank you," she said simply, "for saving my life." "For everything." On impulse, Colt took her hand and pressed it briefly. "Be well, Katherine Summers." And then she was gone, whisked away in the marshal's sleigh, the bells fading into the distance until Colt stood alone in the sudden silence of his cabin. It felt emptier than it ever had before. 3 days later, Colt hitched his wagon and headed to Whitetail Creek. He told himself it was for supplies, for business at the bank, for a dozen practical reasons that had nothing to do with a pair of blue eyes or chestnut hair or conversations by firelight. The town had grown since his last visit, new buildings sprouting along the main street. The promise of the railroad had brought speculators and businesses, transforming the once sleepy settlement into a bustling frontier town. Colt completed his errands methodically, saving Whitman's general store for last. As he approached the large clapboard building, his step faltered. What exactly did he plan to say to Kate? How would her uncle receive him? What if the marshal had already spread tales about their time alone together? Taking a deep breath, Colt pushed through the door. A bell jangled overhead, and he found himself in a well-stocked establishment, shelves lined with everything from tools to fabrics to canned goods. An elderly man stood behind the counter, helping a customer select tobacco. Colt removed his hat, scanning the store for Kate but seeing no sign of her. When the customer departed, he approached the counter. "Afternoon," he said. "You must be Thomas Whitman." The old man eyed him curiously. "I am indeed, and you are?" "Colt Patterson, I ranch about 20 miles out," he hesitated. "I was hoping to speak with your niece, Miss Summers." Whitman's expression changed immediately, his features hardening. "Ah, you're the one who had my Katherine trapped in your cabin all those days." Colt stiffened. "I assure you, sir, it wasn't like that. Your niece was lost in the blizzard. I offered shelter, nothing more." "That may be," Whitman said skeptically, "but you must understand how it appears." "A young woman of good family, alone with a stranger for over a week." He shook his head. "Katherine's reputation has suffered enough already." "Is she here?" Colt pressed. "I'd like to speak with her myself." "She's not available to you, Mr. Patterson," Whitman said firmly. "Katherine appreciates your assistance during the storm, but she has responsibilities here now, a new life to build." "She doesn't need complications." The message couldn't have been clearer. Colt was being dismissed, categorized as a complication to be avoided. "I see," he said stiffly. "Then please convey my regards to Miss Summers. Tell her I wish her well in her new position." He turned to leave, anger and disappointment warring within him. He'd been a fool to come, to think that what had happened during the blizzard could extend beyond those snowbound days. "Mr. Patterson," Whitman called after him. "I'm not an unreasonable man. Katherine has spoken well of you and your kindness during her ordeal. Perhaps in time, when the gossip has died down, you might call again, properly, in daylight with clear purpose." Colt paused at the door. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman, I'll consider that." But as he stepped back into the winter sunlight, Colt knew he wouldn't return. Kate was establishing herself in town, building a respectable position. The last thing she needed was association with a solitary rancher of questionable background. Better to let her go, let her find her place without his shadow hanging over her. He'd almost reached his wagon when a voice called his name. Turning, he saw Kate hurrying down the boardwalk toward him, a heavy shawl clutched around her shoulders against the cold. "You're leaving?" she asked, slightly breathless. "Without seeing me?" "Your uncle made it clear you weren't available," Colt replied, drinking in the sight of her. In town clothes, with her hair properly arranged, she looked even more lovely and even more out of his reach. "I was making deliveries," she explained. "Mrs. Thornton at the millinery said she'd seen you in town. Her cheeks were flushed, whether from the cold or her hurried pursuit, Colt couldn't tell. "I wanted to thank you properly. Things ended so abruptly the other night." "No thanks needed," Colt said. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true." Kate glanced over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "My uncle is protective. He means well, but he doesn't understand what happened during the blizzard." "What did happen, Kate?" Colt asked quietly. She met his eyes, and for a moment the busy street around them seemed to fade away. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, "but it felt important, like something I shouldn't simply walk away from." Before Colt could respond, a man's voice called out, "Katherine, there you are." They both turned to see a well-dressed man approaching, perhaps 30 years old, with a confident stride and an expensive Eastern coat. He smiled broadly at Kate, then gave Colt a curious glance. "I've been looking everywhere for you," the man said to Kate. "Your uncle said you were making deliveries, but I checked the millinery and the dressmakers." "Preston," Kate said, sounding startled. "I was just speaking with Mr. Patterson. He's the rancher who sheltered me during the blizzard." "Ah," Preston extended his hand. "Preston Harrington, I must thank you, sir, for assisting Miss Summers. The whole town has been talking about her dramatic rescue." Colt shook the offered hand briefly, noting the soft skin and manicured nails of a man who'd never done hard labor. "It wasn't dramatic, just necessary." "Nevertheless, we're all grateful." Harrington turned to Kate. "Katherine, your uncle is expecting us for lunch. Mrs. Caldwell is joining us to discuss the Ladies' Aid Society." Kate hesitated, looking torn. "Of course, I'll be right there." To Colt, she said, "Mr. Patterson, thank you again for everything, perhaps." "Good day, Miss Summers," Colt interrupted, replacing his hat. "Mr. Harrington." He climbed into his wagon without looking back, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. As he drove away, he caught a glimpse of Kate's face in the side mirror, watching him go. It was better this way, he told himself. Kate clearly had prospects in town, respectable ones like this Harrington fellow who could offer her the kind of life she deserved. Not a hardscrabble existence on a remote ranch with a man who'd spent most of his life avoiding attachments. The winter landscape blurred around him as Colt headed home, the cold settling into his bones in a way it never had before. The weeks that followed were the longest of Colt's life. He threw himself into ranch work, exhausting himself with tasks that could have waited until spring. He repaired fences, cleaned out the stable, inventoried his herd again and again. Anything to keep his mind from wandering to Whitetail Creek, to a general store where a woman with chestnut hair and blue eyes was building a new life without him. February brought unusually mild weather, melting much of the remaining snow. Colt used the opportunity to ride his boundaries, checking for stray cattle or sign of predators. It was on one such ride, nearly a month after the blizzard, that he spotted a horse and rider approaching from the direction of town. He waited, hand resting near his sidearm out of habit. As the rider drew closer, Colt's heart quickened, a woman on a sturdy bay mare, her posture straight and confident. Kate pulled up a few yards away, her cheeks pink from the ride, her blue eyes bright. She wore a practical riding habit and had her hair braided and pinned beneath a small hat. "Mr. Patterson," she greeted him formally, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Miss Summers," he replied, struggling to keep his voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "I've come on business," she said, producing a small ledger from her saddlebag. "My uncle is expanding his accounts with local ranchers. We're offering credit terms for spring supplies." She held his gaze steadily. "I volunteered to call on you personally." Colt bit back a smile. That's a long ride for business that could have been conducted by mail. "The personal touch is important in business relationships," Kate replied primly, though her eyes danced with something that belied her formal tone. "Besides, I wanted to see how the rocking pea had weathered the rest of winter." "Did you now?" Colt moved his horse alongside hers. "And what does your uncle think of this?" "Business call." "He believes I'm visiting the widow Jenkins at the Collins Ranch," Kate admitted. "She's teaching me to make proper sourdough bread. I'll stop there on my way back." "Deception, Miss Summers, I'm shocked." "Not deception, simply a creative arrangement of my schedule." She straightened in the saddle. "Are you going to invite me in, Mr. Patterson? It was a long ride." Colt chuckled, "Of course. Where are my manners?" They rode side by side to the cabin. As they dismounted and tended to the horses, Colt noticed how naturally Kate moved around his property as if she belonged there. Inside, she removed her hat and gloves, surveying the cabin with a smile. "It looks exactly the same," she observed. Did you expect it to change? No, I suppose not. She turned to face him directly, but I have. Changed, that is. Colt leaned against the door frame, studying her. How so? I've been thinking about what you said, about the frontier being no place for family, for connections. About how it's safer to be alone. She moved to the window, looking out at the vast landscape. I've been wondering if that's true, or if it's just what we tell ourselves when we're afraid. Afraid of what? Colt asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Of loss, of pain, Kate turned back to him, of discovering that what we thought we wanted isn't what we need at all. Colt moved closer, drawn by the intensity in her eyes. And what do you think you need, Katherine Summers? I came west to start over, to build something meaningful. I thought that meant the store, a position in town, respectability. She took a deep breath. But during that blizzard, trapped here with you, I found something I wasn't looking for, something I didn't even know I wanted. Kate, Colt began, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. Since returning to town, I've been courted by Preston Harrington. He's a banker newly arrived from Denver, respectable, established, exactly the sort of man I thought I should want. She met Colt's eyes directly. But he isn't you. The words hung in the air between them, changing everything. What are you saying? Colt asked, his voice rough. I'm saying that perhaps we're both wrong about the frontier. Perhaps it isn't about what it takes away, but what it offers, the chance to define ourselves on our own terms, to build something true. She stepped closer. I'm saying that I haven't stopped thinking about you, about this place, about who I was when I was here. Colt's heart hammered against his ribs. Your uncle is concerned with my happiness above all, Kate interrupted. He's protective, yes, but he's also seen what Preston Harrington hasn't, that I'm distracted, restless, that I look toward the hills where your ranch lies more often than is proper. She smiled softly. He's the one who suggested I bring the ledger today, a pretext if I needed one. And the widow Jenkins will indeed teach me to make sourdough eventually. Kate's smile widened. But first I thought we might discuss those credit terms, and perhaps you might play your guitar again. I've missed your music. Colt stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Kate, I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you the life someone like Harrington could. I've had wealth, she replied simply. It didn't protect my family from betrayal or loss. It didn't keep me warm during a blizzard. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. What you offered me in this cabin was worth more: honesty, respect, the chance to be seen for who I truly am. And who are you truly? Colt asked, his voice low. I'm a woman who wants a partnership, not just security. Who isn't afraid of hard work or isolation if it means building something real. Her blue eyes held his steadily. I'm a woman who thinks perhaps we found each other in that blizzard for a reason. Colt covered her hand with his own. I thought I knew what I wanted, this land, my herd, my solitude. Then you came along and made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Is that a bad thing? Kate asked softly. No, Colt admitted, it's terrifying. And exhilarating. He smiled ruefully. I've spent 15 years avoiding connections because I feared what the frontier might take. I never considered what I might be missing. And now I'm wondering if some risks are worth taking. He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. If some things are worth fighting for, even knowing they could be lost. Kate leaned into his touch. That's the most human thing there is, Colt Patterson, loving despite the risk. It's not unique to the frontier. It's just life. You make it sound simple, he murmured. It isn't simple at all, Kate replied, but I think it might be necessary, at least for me. The air between them seemed to vibrate with possibility, with unspoken promises and fears. Colt knew they were standing at a crossroads. He could retreat to his solitude, send her back to town and the safe, respectable future that awaited her there. Or he could take the greatest risk of his life and open his heart to this remarkable woman who'd blown into his world like the blizzard itself, unexpected, powerful, transformative. I don't have any pretty words, Colt said finally, but I know that when the marshal took you away, this place stopped feeling like home, and I know that seeing you now makes me think about things I'd given up on: a real house on this land, children running in the yard, music in the evenings. He took a deep breath. I know that I don't want to go back to the way things were before. Kate's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Neither do I. So where does that leave us? Colt asked. It leaves us with a choice, Kate said simply. We can be afraid of what we might lose, or brave enough to reach for what we want. Colt stepped closer, drawing her into his arms. I'm choosing brave, he whispered. So am I, Kate replied, and then his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home and setting out on a grand adventure all at once. Spring came to Wyoming in fits and starts, green pushing through melting snow, wildflowers appearing overnight in meadows still patched with white. At the Rocking Pea, change came just as suddenly. Colt's proposal was as straightforward as the man himself, offered on a crisp March evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. Kate's acceptance was immediate, her joy unmistakable. Thomas Whitman, after initial reservations, gave his blessing. "I've never seen my Catherine so certain about anything," he told Colt gruffly, "and I hear you're a man who keeps his word and pays his debts. That's worth more than fancy manners in my book." They were married in April, a small ceremony in Whitetail Creek's newly built church. The town turned out in force, curious about the young woman who'd chosen a rancher's life over the attentions of the bank manager. Preston Harrington attended with gracious congratulations, already courting the milliner's daughter. Kate moved to the ranch with her books, her clothes, and a determination that both impressed and occasionally startled her new husband. She approached ranch life as she had everything else, with intelligence, adaptability, and an unwavering belief that any challenge could be overcome with sufficient effort. The first year brought changes to the Rocking Pea. Kate's business acumen led to expanded cattle contracts and more efficient operations. Colt's dreams of a larger house began to take shape, with construction starting that summer. 2 additional hands were hired for year-round work, allowing the ranch to grow while giving the newlyweds time together. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Colt often played his guitar while Kate worked on the ranch accounts or read aloud from one of her beloved books. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in colors no Eastern artist could capture. Any regrets? Colt asked one such evening, a year after the blizzard that had brought them together. Kate, her head resting against his shoulder, considered the question. "Only that I didn't get lost in a snowstorm sooner," she replied with a smile. Colt chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "I'm serious, this life isn't easy. Town has more comforts, more society." "And less of you," Kate pointed out, "less of this." She gestured to the vast landscape spread before them, painted gold by the setting sun. "Less of the life we're building together." "You've changed this place," Colt said softly, "changed me." "We've changed each other," Kate corrected. "That's what partnership means." As twilight deepened around them, Colt reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd spent most of his life convinced that the frontier was a place of loss, where connections only led to pain. Kate had shown him another truth, that even here, perhaps especially here, what made life worth living was what you built together, what you cherished despite the risks. "I have something to tell you," Kate said, breaking into his thoughts. "Something that will change things again." Colt turned to her, noting the secret smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Lo?" She took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We'll need to hurry with the new house. This one's getting crowded." Colt stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "You're going to have a baby," Kate confirmed, her eyes bright with happiness. "In autumn, our own little Wyomingite." Joy flooded through Colt, alongside a momentary flash of the old fear. The frontier was hard on children, on families. But looking at Kate's radiant face, he knew they would face whatever came together. "A family," he said wonderingly, "our family." "The start of one," Kate agreed. "Are you happy?" In answer, Colt pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude he couldn't put into words. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he whispered. "Happier than I thought I had any right to be." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Colt and Kate Patterson sat together on the porch of the home they'd made, watching night claim the land they both loved. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of tomorrow, of seasons to come, of a future neither of them could have imagined before a blizzard brought them together. The frontier had not taken from them. It had given a chance meeting, a shared struggle, the opportunity to discover that even in the wildest places, hearts can find their way home.